we get stressed when we think our needs are not going to be met. And when we get stressed, our body predicts that we need to fight, flee, freeze, or fawn, which is
Mhm.
like, let me please you. Or I love this other one, fix it, right? That's also a stress response. Let me fix it. Let me go out and solve this problem for you so that I can get what I want, right? And so those are the dominant ways in which we operate. Those are all stress response reactions. Those are our animal instincts. You do the sort of fawning and fix it. Well, you have this layer of humanity in there thinking that, oh, I've got this rational mind that's thinking about this and all that. And so I think the answer is what you have found, Dean, which is center,
Mhm.
right? Because when you find your physical center, when you find your mental center, when you find your emotional center, when you find your energetic center, and I love the soul center piece that you added in there. When you are in that place of center, then you have access to being fully present and responding to the world from a place of responsibility, like I am able to respond to everything that I am aware of. And responsibility doesn't mean I have to, but it means I have the ability to, which is very different from reactivity, which
Mhm.
is what we do from the stress response.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And my name is Dean Walker, and I've been doing this podcast for just a little under 10 years now, along with a body of work here in an outpost on the interwebs called Living Resilience. And that Living Resilience is started out as a website and now has grown to be a Mighty Networks platform that includes online recorded and live coursework in service of the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities around the world. And it also includes a number of live, now all Zoom. Used to have some live face-to-face stuff. I'm that old, I can remember when we used to get together in person. And now we do all of our support groups and special focus experiential training groups here in Zoom. And I've had the pleasure of meeting in a couple of those different groups. Recently, a rather new participant in the work, Dr. Cindy Sholes. And may I call you Cindy?
Yes, absolutely, please.
Okay, thank you. Um, almost as soon as we met in that, I think it was first in Safe Circle and then in the Saturday Islands of Sanity in a Mad World coursework, which is, of course, a couple of 1 hour sessions on the first and third Saturdays of every month between now and the end of September 2025. And all of the months of this year-long course are available in recorded fashion on that Mighty Networks site. And all the ways to connect with all the stuff we'll be mentioning today is, of course, available in the show notes. So those who are sparked or interested in what we're talking about and the various pieces of curriculum and so on, you'll be able to find the notes that will connect you, the links that will connect you down below. So what I saw, what I experienced when we first met, when you first presenced yourself in our weekly Safe Circle gatherings, was that both your profession and some of the history, some of your life circumstances that you also shared in your introduction to us that evening, it was an immediate like, this is a person built for this chapter of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And what I haven't mentioned in a while, it's good that I have an excuse to mention it, is I've really adapted uh, the coursework, the themes that we're talking about most often now in this Poetry of Predicament podcast, which is a YouTube channel. So video podcasts, a YouTube channel, all of it aligned with the Islands of Sanity in a Mad World course. And the theme, the undercurrent for this entire year-long course is built on the premise that we are actually living in, we have created for ourselves globally an insane self-terminating culture. That's my assertion. That's underpins many of the, well, all of the coursework and much of the special focus group work that we do here. And Cindy, I think I'd like to start this by asking you from your professional stance and also from your multidimensional stance outside of your profession. Um, my sense is you have a lot to say about that. Like, perhaps I could put it in question form. Are we living in an insane culture or a culture that is extremely not well
Yeah.
mentally, psychologically, spiritually, relationally, and so on? That is behind my assertion that we are indeed an insane, self-terminating culture. So if I may, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Let let us know a little bit about your professional side and also these other aspects of yourself that resonate so apparently well with this material. And then if you could just take us on a little ride of how you would respond to, are we insane as a global culture, or is there a more clinically appropriate way to describe a global culture that seems pretty clearly to be headed in a self-terminating direction, probably within my old guy lifetime? So if you would, please introduce yourself as you'd like to be known and take it from there, if you would.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be part of this and to share with your community, Dean. And if you're watching, thank you for tuning in. I'm just thrilled to be able to be a part of this community because I feel like this community is a spot of sanity. I will introduce myself. So I go by Dr. Cindy Sholes, and you can absolutely call me Cindy. I have a PhD in neuroscience, so I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't diagnose or treat psychological conditions or diseases. So I won't be giving a diagnosis for our culture. However, I have a lot to say about it from a neurological perspective or a neuroscience perspective. And so what I have really been fascinated with since I was a little girl, actually, how is it that we come to behave the way that we behave? And And I kind of came to an understanding that a lot of the behavior that we have, and I heard a crazy statistic recently, maybe on your podcast actually, or not on your podcast, but in the course, that like 0.5% of all of our decisions, something like that, are made not by our rational mind. Well, the 0.5% is all that is made by our rational mind, which leaves like 99.5% that is not made by our rational, logical mind, the decisions that we make. And so if you consider that, then what that means is what I've known for a long, long time is, in which I discovered in my like continuing to look, is that most of what we do kind of comes unconsciously. So what does that really mean? What that really means is that it's our bodies speaking to us. It's our stress response from which we're reacting. We are pre-programmed by the time we're in adults to be able to navigate the world, which is a good thing. And in fact, it's not a crazy thing because it's just the natural state of human beings. You wouldn't want to have to learn how to drive your car every time you got in it. You've learned how to drive it, and that's a good thing. And you know how, and now you can drive it and think about something else at the same time. I don't necessarily encourage that, but you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so the work that I do is helping people change what's going on in their subconscious mind. And I actually developed a special technique called REST. It's REST that's got 2 R's, Rapid Reprogramming of Emotional Stress Technique. It's RREST. And it's a way of healing generational and childhood trauma, because that is what sets the imprint for a lot of our stress response behavior. So when you're getting triggered and behaving in ways that maybe aren't the most effective, like you're reacting out of fear or shame or any of the other things, you're reacting out of stress, and that's pre-programmed by either childhood or generational traumas. And I think that if we're insane in our culture, it's because there are a lot of trauma imprints that we're very much unaware of. And I think you talked earlier to me when we were just chatting about the shame imprints and all that stuff. And absolutely. And so I've been very interested in how do we heal that. So we have ways to do that. So just sort of throw that out there. And you ask the question, like, is this world, that culture that we live in, insane? The world is not, but is the culture we live in insane? I think largely it is. And what you're hearing about, and this is what I really want people to hear, is what you hear about is the divisiveness, the fear, the shame imprints, and you're hearing about all that's going on over there. And what I want everybody to kind of understand, because this is really where I have found solutions, is that divisiveness is already happening inside our own heads, because most of us were taught to honor the rational mind and not our intuition. We're taught to block off our emotions. We're taught to not feel the discomfort that is experienced in our body. So we have already a lot, and we all have, to give people a way that maybe makes more sense, like you all have an inner judge, you have an inner critic, you get that, like that sabotages you and beats you down, or is criticizing other people and beating them down. And so that's going on inside your own head. And those are all your own imprints from your own childhood and previous generations, and dare I say previous lives. But all of that kind of imprinting is creating this sort of divisiveness inside us.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to even talk about the possibility of healing the insanity in the world around us, we have to start with healing it within ourselves.
May I just break in for a moment?
Yes,
I
please.
don't want to stop your momentum, but I'd like to just offer out a little bit of how we talk about exactly the territory, the neighborhood, if you will, that you're
Yes,
describing for
please.
us. And I just want to share my language. I don't want to try and I want I want it to be crystal clear. I am not a peer of someone of your educational background, your professional background, but I'm doing the best I can to piece together a shared language that people from all walks of life might be able to be in this neighborhood and at least be conversant and be able to hold space for one another in some of the challenges that it is to make sense of this world from our inner experience. So, if I may,
Yeah,
as
please.
quickly as I can, I'd like to suggest that how we talk about it here in this living resilience thing is that imagine, if you will, we have, of course, this physical body.
Mhm.
This is where it all happens. This is where every conceivable part of what we do and how we look at ourselves and talk about ourselves is here. And one way that we have sort of distinguished certain core elements that seem to be present for all folks who have their wits about them, like, and we talk about them not just as a physical body, where we obviously have a physical center. You know, if we've ever done martial arts or if we've done gymnastics or we walk down the street, we know when we're in our physical center and we know when we're not. And there are some people that are extraordinarily centered, and that's a whole different conversation. Well, what we also talk about here is a number of other bodies, if you will, within our body.
Mhm.
And each of those bodies has a center of its own. So it doesn't sound like too much gobbledygook. Let me just give a couple of examples. So if we have a mental body, the mental center could be called our ability to sense make. Can I make sense of this world or this relationship or this moment in that mental body? Now, of course, it's not a real body, but I hope you can just, I'm speaking more to the audience right now. I hope you
Yeah,
all
I
can
get it.
just hear and, play with this with me as a kind of a thought experiment. So there's physical body, physical center, mental body, mental center. Another one is our feeling body, which you just mentioned a couple of moments ago. There seems to be this cultural theme for hundreds of years now to suppress that feeling body, to stunt it,
Mhm.
and evidently quite intentionally so. We can possibly get to that later. So feeling body also having its center, having a very felt sense of I am in my feeling body center right now. I have a sense of home inside my experience.
Mhm.
And so if I'm there, and if you and I are exploring together in any kind of human relationship way, if you are in your feeling body center and I am in mine, there's far less of a danger of us getting triggered or us being insulted, or, there's a lot more wiggle room for us to be
Mhm.
human with one another and genuine and authentic in our expression. Is this communicating okay?
Yeah,
There's one more that I'd like to mention. Actually, I'll just give you the
please.
names of the other two that we speak about the most. Another is the energy body, which I
Mhm.
don't get to speak about with too many folks because it's probably the least known of any of them. There's so much value, and that's for a later time. Perhaps our next time we get together, we can talk about that.
Maybe.
And
Yeah.
the last one I'd like to mention is the soul body or archetypal body. And it also is a bit obscure. It's not nearly as well known. One person I could mention that I'm sure you're very familiar with, or probably more so than I am, uh, a person who literally created a whole wing of psychology and spiritual psychology, um, is Carl Jung. And
Yes.
you've mentioned the ideas of synchronicity and serendipity, which, at least the synchronicity part, I know that he created much of his body of work on that foundation. So I just wanted to mention these different aspects of ourselves that each can resonate with different parts of this conversation. You've had a couple of them resonating already. Thank you so much for sitting through this, my layout. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of how we talk about those pieces. Love, what you continue to do what you're already doing, which is lay out how you talk about those pieces.
Yeah,
So
and
thank
I
you.
think, and I appreciate you doing that because I think it's important to connect the dots, like the language that I kind of frankly grew up with was scientific language. And and so that's kind of there's this biological foundation for like my framework of understanding of the world in general. And one of the things that I love it when neuroscience starts to validate the stuff you just spoke about, Dean, right? So I want to give you some sort of neuroscience, like biological language for what you just said, because I think you're spot on.
Oh,
And
beautiful. I would love that.
absolutely, right? Like, and I think that this is part of what's I think needed for people to understand that the dominant culture has been telling us we have five senses. But the reality is we have something like 11 or 12. 11, which wasn't including the soul body that you spoke about, which I'd love to hear more about because that's not one that I have run into with the level of clarity that I think you could speak about it. But I actually think the other four bodies that you spoke about, I do want us to touch on a little bit. But the five senses is the ones you learned in elementary school. You've got your sight, you've got hearing, you have touch, you have taste, you have smell. So most of us think that's the only way in which we experience the world is through those five senses. But it's not true. And it's not true because you experience emotions, which is a whole nother sense. You experience the internal workings of your body, which is called interoception, which is a whole other sense. You experience the position of your limbs in space. It's another sensation called proprioception. So, and you experience that energy body. When you walk into a room and you can feel that palpably the energy is not good or the energy is good, or you perceive that there's somebody behind you, but you haven't actually seen them, but they're there. When you feel love in the presence of somebody else that you haven't even really touched or connected with, but there's this energy that's present. So
Hmm.
we have that sensation as well. So but you're taught that there's five
All right.
when actually there's 11 and so or 12. And so when you have and some people go, oh, well, maybe there's a sixth extrasensory perception. It's not just one more, it's like a whole bunch more. And it's when you add all of those and when you're present to all of those, when you have access and you allow all of that information to come in. I call them channels of information.
Hmm.
You let all those channels of information come in, that's when you have access to intuition, which is not, I don't believe a separate channel. I think it's an integration of all of those channels. And I think it's when you have access to intuition that you're fully present in the center. Each of those bodies that you mentioned, your center, and then intuition is something that you can trust. I think if you aren't centered in each of those bodies, if there's stress going on, which means that you're somehow out of balance in any of those areas, it is not like, then you're going to get an integration of whatever, but it may not be the same rich, clear, knowing intuition that you have when you're fully centered and all
Yeah.
parts of you integrated. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's possible. And it takes, and I know you've teach this a lot in the work that you're doing, it takes practice.
Yeah.
And it's
If I
really
may,
hard right now.
if I may just pause you again,
Yeah.
I'm really moved right now. I don't get to speak with people who have your level of expertise very often. And even less often do I get to hear your very informed layout of your experience, not only your educational background, professional background, but your experiential background. As you describe what I might call this neighborhood from your perspective. And it's, I mean, mind-blowing to me right now how much your neighborhood and mine are overlapping. It's an incredible validation. And so I'm letting you know right now, in real time, my feeling body, I'm feeling you absolutely being in that center of your own feeling body. I feel quite comfortably ensconced in the center of mine, and that resonance is moving. I am so moved by the uh the resonance is the best word that I have for it. It's so validating, so confirming in a world that is, I mean, if I hear the words evidence-based one more time, I'm going to just gag. I understand that people are trying so hard to, go with the science and have it be all validated and have it be, you know, uh, true because it's replicable and so on. And what you've just taken us through in these past few minutes, as you've been laying out your seeing, your experiencing of these really vitally important elements, um, this is actually nudging into that soul body or the archetypal body, which really has very little regard for evidence-based anything, but is, I would assert, as real as anything has ever been in human experience, if we can open up to the really generous and clear way that you've just laid out the territory for us to see. So thank you. I am
I, I
I'm
want
all
to
the
I want to speak a
so
little bit about the
full, like this is
evidence-based.
incredible.
I want to talk a little bit about science with you, actually, because I
Yeah,
think science both gets a bad rap and then too much, too much honor at the same
right,
time.
right.
As if, like there's those that are for and those that are against, as if it's a ball game. It's so not like that in science at all. Science is just a way of knowing things,
Hmm.
and it is not the only way. So when you have evidence-based stuff, yeah, and I have to say I like it. I love it when the neuroscience or any other form of science validates the experiential perspective that I have of life. Like it really makes me feel like I'm on solid ground here. It
Sure, sure.
supports my center. It supports my center partly because I was raised as a scientist.
Hmm.
But I know also as a scientist and as a human being, that science is not the only way of knowing information. And so there is a lot that science cannot and does not know. That doesn't mean it's not true.
Hmm.
Just because science doesn't have any proof for it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think that to think that you have to have science, validating something is very, very short-sighted, and it's giving science way too much credit,
Hmm.
way too much credit. Or to think that when you hear something that has been scientifically validated, that that's bullshit or you should discard the science, I think that's short-sighted also.
Hmm.
Um, because science has given us a lot of insight into the world that is beyond the 11 senses that we have,
Sure.
right?
Hmm.
microscopes, telescopes, like there's a lot
Mhm.
we wouldn't know if it weren't for scientific discovery. So I think that both perspectives are valid, and I think we need to quit like I'm for or against
Yeah.
any of these ways of knowing things um, in general. And so I would encourage you all to have an open mind about the evidence-based stuff and
Yeah.
also those things that science hasn't had an opportunity to approach and that you're still experiencing inside you. Because I think that it's our internal experience that we want to, when it comes from center, I think it's closer to the truth,
Hmm.
right? But we never have access to truth. None of us do,
Hmm.
not really. There is a truth out there in the world, but everything's filtered through our human beingness,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, like that.
Thank you. That's uh, a fair and and important balance that you're requesting of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyways, just another way of getting information. And
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in like I love to receive information about the world and understand it. And I don't know, it
Mm.
just gives me so much comfort in understanding. And so I'm very interested in all the ways in which we know things. And your experience through all these different channels of information is one way in which we know things.
Yeah.
And um, I've been spending a lot of time lately trying to understand and experience more on the level of spirituality, which is why I'm really super interested in your soul stuff. And I think we don't talk enough about the energy body you spoke about.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually super important, I think, for us to start bringing into conversation more openly.
Yeah.
Uh, because yeah, maybe there's no evidence base of it, but it doesn't matter whether science has gotten there or not. It will
Yeah.
catch up. It's just behind in that particular area.
I'm really ready to go in any direction that you are inclined. Whatever you might have staged and ready to launch into.
I I don't really have anything, so I'm happy to just
I I've been noticing that you've been sliding in a little bit of an assertion that I am in total agreement with, that to the degree I'm dysregulated, to the degree don't have access to that center, something has knocked me off center, and I
yeah.
don't quite have the ability in the moment to bring myself fully back. So I'm dysregulated. So I could be very grumpy to be around. I could be kind of contracted and withdraw. I could disassociate and so on. There's all kinds of stress behaviors that can happen when we're dysregulated. And if I could, I'd like to just take that assertion and blow it out to the whole. Let's just talk about the USA for now, where there's plenty going on in our world. To we don't need to go international at the moment. Um, I would assert that our culture has been for a little over 100 years now been building out and refining an immensely powerful body of work that is basically controlling mass consciousness. From Edward Bernays on out, it's been their primary um, inner directive at the both corporate level of having us be compliant consumers and the government level of controlling the narrative to have us be compliant citizens. And both involve having us knocked off of our center so we don't have that sense-making ability to call on so quickly as we might. And to I've wondered since I was a young kid, like why is it that we are so adversarial with each other, neighbors to neighbors? This is so crazy. And why is it that we're voting against our own best interest? Like, what could have us doing these things? And now, obviously, in the past couple of decades, we need to add to that, how is it that we can be fouling our own nest? We're literally self-terminating. We're killing off hundreds of species every day as human presence on the planet, and we're taking ourselves out and many, many more species. So these are extraordinary examples of insanity from my point of view. So I'm wondering if you could speak to this kind of larger scale dysregulation, this larger scale being knocked off center almost since birth. We're saturated in this extraordinarily disempowering way of relating, way of presencing, way of being as human beings. Is that at all sparking for you?
Well, only a lot of deep sadness and grief, because I think you're spot on with the truth on that, is
Hmm.
that part of the challenge is that those that seek to control, and I don't think it's like specific people, but like it's organizations, as you said, and whole industries and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's like everywhere, but those that seek to control the masses are manipulating our animal instincts.
Mhm.
And then the problem is that we all have them. And then this is the other thing is that those that seek to control are also operating from sort of their base human animal instincts as well. So you ask the question, like, why do people fight with each other? Well, we fight with each other because we think that resources are limited and scarce, which in fact is the reality when you look at the global scale.
Hmm.
And then we think, oh, well, if it's limited and scarce, then I want to make sure I get my share, or I might not get what I need, right? So there's this fear that operates. And so if you think about kids on the playground, right? Like just even the standing in line for the water fountain, like here in our culture, we have a line. Other cultures, they don't have a line. They're just like whoever gets there first, right? But there's and if, in fact, I just to speak to this because we have a lot of traffic laws and signals and so forth here in the United States, and so everything is regulated with so like if you come up to a stoplight, you stop, and this is a way in which we comply with the traffic laws, but it also keeps us safe. So there's good reasons why we do it. But and I always grew up thinking, well, this we need all of those traffic things in order for things to move, and probably for things to move efficiently, we certainly do. But then I went to Mexico recently, and I don't know how many of you guys have been to Mexico or if you have, but we went to San Miguel Allende, which was fantastic. I loved it. And it's a pretty good sized city. But what's interesting is they have these very narrow streets, very much like in Europe. Barely two cars can fit down. The sidewalks are narrow. It's very hard to pass people on the sidewalk. They have zero traffic lights. They have zero traffic signals.
Hmm.
And I think very few accidents. They are amazingly understand the rules and are polite to one another. They don't have oh, it's like I got to go first, or like, you're in my way and it's my turn. And like, they don't have that going on as far as I can tell. In that culture, at least when I was there, I was amazed. I didn't understand it, so I probably might have created an accident, except they're paying attention, so they're not going to let me. But you know what I mean? I'm like, it just was seamless, and it was generous, and it was cooperative, and it was like respectful, and I was like, wow, this is such a different way of operating in the world with an entire culture, right? Which helped me remember that, our culture has this other stuff going on, right? And the stuff we have going on, even though it feels super normal, is not the only way to be and is maybe not the best way to be necessarily
Mhm.
either. But I think that we get stressed when we think our needs are not going to be met. And when we get stressed, our body predicts that we need to fight, flee, freeze, or fawn, which is
Mhm.
like, let me please you. Or I love this other one, fix it, right? That's also a stress response. Let me fix it. Let me go out and solve this problem for you so that I can get what I want, right? And so those are the dominant ways in which we operate. Those are all stress response reactions. Those are our animal instincts. You do the sort of fawning and fix it. Well, you have this layer of humanity in there thinking that, oh, I've got this rational mind that's thinking about this and all that. And so I think the answer is what you have found, Dean, which is center,
Mhm.
right? Because when you find your physical center, when you find your mental center, when you find your emotional center, when you find your energetic center, and I love the soul center piece that you added in there. When you are in that place of center, then you have access to being fully present and responding to the world from a place of responsibility, like I am able to respond to everything that I am aware of. And responsibility doesn't mean I have to, but it means I have the ability to, which is very different from reactivity, which
Mhm.
is what we do from the stress response. So I
Yeah.
think it's reactivity that you're seeing out there. And the answer is responsibility.
Mhm.
And I don't know how to have this be to scale, right? I only know how to have it within myself,
Yeah.
and I can speak about it and resonate with people that have seen this and are working on that within themselves. And I'm not perfect. Like I get stressed too,
Sure.
and I get off my center just like everybody else. And the
Yeah.
stuff going on in the world has been really hard to come back to center.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think it's critical and necessary.
Yeah. Well, I just love how you just laid that out. Um, I also have come to a similar conclusion in generating this work for 10 years now at this scale and at this level of intensity for these issues, decades of work at a much lighter weight level, organizational development coaching and, conflict transformation and so on. It's never been super easy, but
I wouldn't say
it's,
that's a lighter weight level either. I think that's the work, right?
Mhm.
So it's just a different place from which you're coming to that work, but that's the work. But yeah, and you're doing scale here with this, which
Yeah.
I just have to say I really appreciate. Um, but anyway, I'm going to let you finish your thought, but I wanted to make sure that,
Mhm.
yeah, this is not lightweight work, any of the work you've been doing.
Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me. Um, the pieces I wanted to add to the gorgeous layout you just gave us is I too I'm 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 limited at this point in my own experiential reference and my own ability to even imagine how to scale it larger. I'm limited to my personal experience, my intimate relationship experience, and then the largest I've been able to get to is some kind of circle. That's usually less 10 or less to be a comfortable, manageable, gettable number of people being able to generate fairly consistently from from the get-go. You know, I've worked with gang kids or young people who are, you know, seriously want to kill one another out on the streets.
Mhm.
So in rival gang circles where there are members of rival gangs in a circle, it is quite possible in a relatively short period of time to generate a coherence, a coherence that is alive in each person's body, in their experience. They'll talk about it like within minutes of starting to generate it. And then collectively in that circle arrangement, it is something that each person, they might use slightly different words for it, but
Mhm.
they're absolutely aware of and can articulate this experience of there's a way in which I feel connected with these other people, and I also feel a coherence in myself. I don't feel like my thoughts are going crazy up here and my heart is thumping over here, or it feels like I'm more of a whole person.
Yeah.
So these two levels of coherence, and I just want to do a shout out, obviously, to by obviously I just mean in my experience, the person who's spearheaded the greatest global expression of this kind of coherence and far larger is Thomas Hubel, and his work is spectacular. It's, you know, in its simplicity, in its um, piercing power. And he's evidently taken it to, you know, a scale of thousands of people. Um, maybe not in the same circle, but certainly in the same organization or nation or, you know, larger regional scale of people coming together with a shared purpose. So I just want to shout out, and that's I'll put some resources to be able to get a hold of Thomas Hubel and his work and his writing in the show notes. And
I'd
I
like,
wanted to mention that because it's when I combine what you just you said it more clearly and more succinctly than I ever did about that five bodies, five centers kind of a model of bringing ourselves best we can to that shared sense of center, and then the coherence kind of being that predictable result when we're doing that together. Um, that's as close to an atmosphere of hope as I can say that I've encountered in these 10 years or my almost uh, like 50 plus years of being collapse acceptant and realizing we're going to do this to ourselves. We're really going to do this, and we're going to take ourselves and many other beyond human species with
and
us.
I would like to say, if we continue on the current trajectory.
Hmm.
And I say that because while all signs are pointing to that, and there's a strong flow in that way,
Hmm.
it's not actually a done deal. There are other possibilities.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, you pointed to Thomas Hubel's work, and there are pockets of which you are one with the work that you're doing, Dean. There are pockets around the world where there is a consciousness that is evolving that potentially could spread to the enough people getting the courage, which is really comes from an awareness to say no more. This isn't what I want my future or the future of my children to look
Right.
like. Now, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how that scale could possibly happen. Um, but I think we're ripe for the need of it.
Mm.
Um, and so like to continue to have hope in that possibility.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I mean, I I just honestly, I'll tell you what it is. It's hard for me to live my life if I don't.
Sure.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this, like, it, you know how comfortable it is to feel like you have control and you can predict what's happening in the next moment, right? Like,
Yes, I remember that. It's been a few
right?
decades, but yes, I do
Yeah,
like it when
right.
it happens.
It's necessary for our hum for our sanity actually to have an illusion of control.
Yeah.
I think the most sane people know on some level that it's an illusion, but we can't actually operate without some illusion of control, because then we would just not live, like we just would off ourselves, right? As individuals, right? Which actually I hadn't thought about this as that the scale of, mass human extinction, that's the trajectory that we're on. It
Mhm.
may be that we have lost an illusion of control that has us go like, well, we don't have control and it's just going to happen. And I just don't think that actually is healthy, because while we don't have control, I think we do have an impact, right? We do get to choose our response to what shows up in our world in every moment. And I think recognizing we have that, I believe we have a powerful autonomy, like an
Mhm.
ability to actually make a choice about what we do when we are present and we're aware and we're centered in those bodies. And I think that, given that we have that choice to manipulate at least our perception of our experience,
Mhm.
if not our experience, I think that is enough control to be able to continue to function and operate in the world. So hope is really important to me. And we talked about this, and like I wrote about it in the circle. I have two kids. They're adults. And so I know someday I'm going to not be here on the planet, right? So
Mhm.
it's my extinction is inevitable. No question about that. But
Mhm.
I care a lot about the potential future for my kids, which they're not that young anymore. And I feel really sad at seeing the struggles that they're likely to have to face. Um, and so part of the reason why I am so strongly wanting to hold on to that hope is not just for me, but also for them.
Mhm.
And I don't know. And yeah, I could speak more about that and the challenges related to that, but um, collapse aware is just being aware of a trajectory. And I get the momentum in that direction. But
Yeah.
I don't know. You won't ever convince me to let go of hope around another
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
Um,
Just if I may,
yeah,
I feel I've distanced myself from the desire to convince anybody of anything in terms of my particular point of view. For instance, I'm quite
understand that.
collapse acceptant,
Yes.
but I'm also warmly curious and interested when someone as knowledgeable and articulate as you are about what it is to lean into a future in a good way. Um, I I would like to just say that I've spent years exploring this whole idea of what is hope and how do people define hope when they throw it around. They use it a lot, as if we're all saying the same thing when we're saying the word hope.
Right.
And I'm not saying that I understand your definition yet. I don't. But when the definition I've heard the most in my exploration is that, excuse me, it goes something like, uh, gee, I hope the experts take care of all these pesky questions about climate change and stuff so that we
Right.
can get back to business and life as usual.
Right.
That's more often than not, maybe not those exact words, but something pretty close
Yeah.
is what's meant by people using the word hope. I don't
Yeah.
think I'm hearing that from you, but
That's not what
I
I'm
I
saying.
predict, if with your permission, I predict we're gonna
Please.
do round two of our conversation sometime soon in the not too distant future.
I
And I
would
would
be.
love for us to explore this part of the neighborhood called hope. How do we define it? How do we live it? How do we include it?
I
So,
would like that. That is an edge of learning for me. So this is something you've been, so I am sort of collapse aware, frankly, very recently. A lot of it is from the work that you've presented. And I am like, my eyes are opening up to a reality that I think I was sitting in the past in the let's hope they figure this out. Let's hope people vote in the right way. Let's hope.
yeah.
And I don't have that kind of hope anymore.
Mhm.
And so I am very curious to learn more about kind of what you have come into the understanding of hope and things. And I would love to talk about that. What I will say that part of my hope is a little bit of magical thinking and faith. But as I dive into this understanding of the energy body and what I'd like to, and spirituality, I'll just say, which I'm thinking is related probably to the soul body that you spoke about.
Mhm.
But as I dive into my understanding of an entire realm of existence, consciousness, that I think is separate and yet integral to the three-dimensional Newtonian world that we mostly perceive as human beings. But as I lean into that, that's where my hope is.
Mhm.
That that and that and I don't know how to articulate that very well, but I just sort of have an intuitive sort of knowing sense that there is still hope there. And I'm not talking about religion
Mhm.
at all. I just want to make that super clear for the
Yes.
people listening because I don't have hope in religion.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is spirituality, and sometimes there is spirituality woven into religion. I think it was supposed to be that way, but well, it's probably supposed to be just the way to control the masses. But I think from the masses' perspective, there was a sense of this is how I access spirituality. I think that finding a way to access that spiritual knowledge or flow or something, I don't even know how to speak about it. This is really, beyond my understanding as a neuroscientist,
Mhm.
because I think science, this is a place where science really hasn't. I mean, we have a little bit, science has done a little bit, but not a lot. And so it's not very, the science isn't really informing this body of knowledge right now.
Mhm.
It's like spirituality is a body of knowledge. It's a way of knowing things also that is way far beyond, and it's ancient, you know. Um, but it's way far beyond what our scientific understanding, which is not nearly as ancient, really can grasp, I think, at this level.
Mhm.
But anyway, that's kind of where I'm leaning into hope at the moment. And it's not the same kind of I hope it's done over there. It really is a I hope from my ability to take responsibility for the work that I do in the world.
And
When I'm
if
aligned
I
with
may, I'm also hearing you
Yeah.
say you're, I just love it that you keep looping back to this notion of what I would call radical responsibility
Yeah.
for your beingness, for your presence in this world. You might not be using exactly those words, but
No,
that's
but
what I'm
that's exactly
hearing,
what it
and
is.
that's is also very moving for me because I've been at this for 10 years, and there are more providers of coaching and healing work and supportive environments for the collapse aware community and so on. And all too rarely is there conversation about these core elements that we've sort of been touching into all the way along. Like, what is it to hold space for one another in a circle? Meaning, have I got the capacity to not only have what's going on inside of me, but enough to then hold space for you and what you might need in terms of attention and care, respect, and so on. But
I'm going to, can we address, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I know you weren't finished with your thought. Um, but I'm curious about, I would like to talk a little bit about the holding space thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you want, you can finish your thought and then we can come back to it.
um, I'm very flexible. They actually are. There have been a number of nuggets in this conversation that are really about these core components that from my perspective, somebody who gives a shit about how to lean into this future and be able to possibly include people, the loved ones, into a circle when they start to pop into collapse awareness and they don't know who else to talk to and where is it safe to talk about it without being ridiculed. We're touching into these. So radical responsibility goes in there, holding space as a skill set is in there. These are all the um, fit into the kind of self-curated skill sets that are implied in this work of living resilience. You'll set up your own set of skills that you want to build out so that you can be more and more functional for the people that you love and want to support. So go ahead. What else you got up to say about space holding?
Well, I'm curious about it because this is just something I also think about. And my guess is you've spoken about it before on the podcast. So I apologize if I'm just, reiterating things you said, although it never hurts to hear it from a different
Oh, yeah,
perspective
yeah, yeah.
multiple times. But it occurs to me that when you say holding space, and I use that term all the time too, and I get it because I feel what that means in my body, and I hold space for my clients. I give retreats. I hold space for um, the participants of the res, res, retreat in all those different venues. I like to think that I'm able to hold space. There's certain times I can't. but
Mhm,
but but I
mhm.
see the value in that. What it means to me to hold space, and I'm just curious if you agree, but what it means to me to hold space is to be centered, as you said, in all of those different areas, even though somebody else comes into the space that is not there. And I like to call that being in alignment with
Mhm.
my highest self, right?
Mhm.
It's just a simple way, like all those different things in being in alignment with my higher self, being emotionally relatively neutral. So I'm not getting knocked off my alignment by being triggered into something else. So
Yeah.
I'm not stressed. I'm not like super excited. I'm fully present. And aligned with my inner being, my highest self. And then if I can stay that way, then almost anybody can come into this space bringing whatever they bring. And what I know to be true is that when you can be in alignment with your highest self in this kind of a heart coherence that you spoke about, right? Like in a positive emotional state, I'm going to just say it that way, because I think sometimes that's the way people experience it, is feeling love or feeling appreciation or gratitude or feeling a positive expectation. Is there's a feeling state to it that I think is really important to my experience of alignment. But and I think that's useful for most people. But coming in from that feeling state, I know that the power of those positive emotions and that coherent state within the context of those positive emotions is more powerful than people being in some other negative emotional state of chaos. And if you can stay in that, the natural human tendency is to want to bridge the gap between one person's emotional state and the others. And if the leader can stay in that positive emotional state of coherence, then automatically the people entering into the group will begin to align with the more positive emotional state. In other words, whatever chaos is showing up in their world, the holding space is allowing that and also allowing them to come into coherence with the whole group, into the positive emotional state. That's the way it occurs to me. I really haven't thought a lot about it until you spoke about it. And I was like, okay, what does he really mean by holding space for? And I just thought it would be useful for me to say, this is what I mean by it. And I don't know if that's what you mean by it as well, but when I hold space for, that's what my intention is to stay in that center and let other people come to their own center within the context of the space that I'm holding.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm thinking about that just because, yeah, where it's hard for me, and I'll be really honest, it's very hard for me to hold that kind of space with my family and particularly my kids.
Yeah.
Really, really hard to hold that with my kids.
Yeah. Well, you said it really well 10 or 15 minutes ago when you said, that there is no small end of this work. This is all, it takes work to make this kind of a space happen. And
Yeah.
that work precedes the hour that we're sitting in circle together. It precedes it by days, hours, weeks, months of generating a consistent presence of, as you said, radical responsibility for my presence, for my level of awareness, for my ability to sense make.
And
It's taken me all of these 10 years to come to a moderately functional sense making ability in this talk about a truly insane aspect of our world to try and sense make in this environment right now. Oh my God. And then we all walk in, if we're people who are less aware than we're talking about being right now, and coming into a room, it's really not much mystery, like why even small project groups can dissolve or blow apart in almost no time at all these days.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
True. It's true. And I just want to say something I appreciate my kids really deeply, and I appreciate the struggles that I've had coming into the place of center and holding space, because I started feeling really triggered and off-centered when they were really little,
Mhm.
and I was really not okay with my getting knocked off a center. I was not okay with my reactivity. I was not okay with that. And I really struggled to find, how do I come back into center, even though there's this going on, and even though I'm getting triggered into old past patterns and imprints and so forth. And a lot of the work I do have done, and I continue to do, is trying to be able to hold space
Mhm.
for those people who I really, really, really love,
Yeah.
you know? And, and I've made so many mistakes as a parent that, like, it's still challenging for me. And sometimes I'm effective, and sometimes that's useful for them. And sometimes they just think, God, Mom, would you just shut up and quit trying to fix my problems? And I go, oh, okay. Well, I went into a fix it response, like
Mm.
I wasn't really holding space. I thought maybe I was holding space. Maybe I was fawning, or maybe I was fixing.
Good
Because,
catch.
yeah, exactly. Like, sometimes they have to catch me, and sometimes I catch myself, and sometimes none of it catch it.
Yeah.
But it's been great teachers. And then I'm like, and I want to apply this ability that I'm learning and still grappling with a lot with my family into every area of my life, because I do think that's where we have the most
Yeah.
place of control, as that radical responsibility, as you called it.
Right. Well, I can feel the envelope of our time together starting to close, and I really am serious. If you're willing, I would love to schedule a part two of this conversation, maybe a month or so out, whatever works for you. I think there's a lot of ground that we've now opened up to be able to explore at a new level. But before we let it close too much more, you're sort of inching into an area that I was hoping that we could end with together, and that is, given your professional experience, given your personal experience, thank you so much for your honesty in your disclosure about your own being a parent and how that's turned out, and still some struggle involved and so on. How very human of you, and I so appreciate it. I'm wondering if you could kind of gather up those different parts of yourself, and as you have been, one more time, and speak as best you could to folks who might be new to this conversation. I know you've heard me say that I assert this is the most challenging conversation in human history. This is the real deal. And so it's really calling on anyone who happens to stumble into collapse awareness, much less collapse acceptance. It's challenging us. It's calling us forth into radical responsibility, into radical awareness of our awareness, radical awareness of our fatal flaws, our humanness, and what we're bringing as best we can to face into this future together. And I'm wondering if there's anything you could share from your own experience, again, professionally and personally and so on, that you could suggest for how does a person grow that capacity to reclaim center when we're knocked off? Are there certain dimensions of personal awareness that you could suggest folks, gather up and engage with in their own way? Any kind of
It,
helpful hints that you could
it's
suggest for someone who might be kind of shocked, jaw dropped at this particular point of, oh gosh, this is really happening?
Yeah. I Just a couple things. One is that that I'm just sort of relatively new to this whole conversation, and there's a lot of thinking and conversing still for me to do around it. I think I mentioned
Yeah.
collapse aware. It occurs to me right now, collapse acceptance. I have skirted around.
Mhm.
Um, and we could have a whole other conversation about that. And I think there's some value in acceptance. It's like accepting your own death is very valuable because then you live the life that you have in the moment more profoundly. But to answer your question, and so I think acceptance is a good strategy. Just because I think, yeah, let's just go there and then you get to like live life now. You
Mhm.
know, like I'm not going to try to fix anything. If I'm just accepting, then I can live life now. And I think there's a lot of value in that. What I will say to people who are sort of new to the community, one of the things I have deeply appreciated about the work that you're doing here is you are providing a community, a container for people to come with whatever understanding they bring in to learn more, to grow deeper in their intellectual knowledge, to grow deeper in their internal knowledge of themselves and I haven't seen this very many other places that the way you continue to support people in coming back to their own personal center is really profound. To be able to make the observations of what's going on out in the world, to really let that in. And for me, like there's been such a, like really letting in that awareness has come with a lot of emotions, a lot of grief. And and one of the things I love about the community that you're creating is that it allows people to come into the whole full emotional experience of what this awareness is and what that means for them and the way in which they're thinking about the future and all that. And to provide a community where people can talk about it
Mhm.
openly, where people can, you know, find what resonates with them, to really find who they are in this context and find what is the work. You know, we talked about radical responsibility, but that goes down to also how do we know, like, what is the work for me to do today? I mean, maybe it's just getting up and making breakfast for your family or getting up and making breakfast for yourself. Like maybe that is the work, right? Maybe it's tending to your garden and maybe that is the work.
Mhm.
My eldest is living at home. They're 26, and their work has been tending to a butterfly, a monarch that they found in a driveway with a broken wing. And for several weeks, that was part of their work,
Mhm.
was keeping that butterfly alive. The butterfly has since passed. We all knew it wasn't going to live forever, but it was an interesting work that was there in the moment, right? And so I don't know what the work is for other people. And I know you don't know either, but what I love about the work you're doing, Dean, is you're creating space and allowing people to find their work
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
take that radical responsibility for whatever their work is.
Mhm.
Um, Even with the trajectory that we're on. Right. So my work is so much about this human consciousness and like in supporting people and coming to this awareness of that radical responsibility and how they can get there. And, you know, you also asked the question, and I think this is where we really need to go into another episode of like, if you get knocked off a center, how do you come back?
Right.
And I'm going to give you my very short, terse answer and give you a reference. One of the things that I kind of came into awareness of at the same time I kind of came into awareness of your work, which has just been so recently, is Mel Robbins' let them theory.
Yes.
And I have found that to be so useful. And so I love her book. I highly recommend it. It's a two-step process. Both steps are super important. The first step is let them. This is acceptance. This is like whatever's happening over there that you can't control. let them. And I bring that into myself too. Whatever's happening inside of me, because I have an inner judge, an inner critic, and all these saboteurs, like all these inner voices, the negative voices, that sometimes fight with each other. I don't know if anybody else has that, but I do. I
No,
call it
I think you're the only person I've
I
ever heard
call
do
it
that.
I call it the itty bitty shitty committee. Anyway,
Yeah,
so I also have found that I let the itty bitty shitty committee
yeah,
do their little thing, and I just quit paying attention. It's sort of like quit paying attention to the news, tune in every once in a while, but quit paying attention to the itty bitty shitty committee that's out there or inside, right?
yeah.
So that's to let them. And I used to push back a lot of resistance to that internal stuff. And I'm like, that wasn't working. That was just having me focus more on it. So let them is really useful because I can tune it out. The second step is even more critical, I think, than the let them, but you really don't have access to it unless you let them. And that is let me. And this is exactly the radical responsibility that we've been talking about. Let
Hmm.
me take control over what I can. And one of the things I realized recently is that it's the serenity prayer. And so, for those of you guys who come from a Christian tradition, you're probably familiar with the serenity prayer, but it's pretty simple. It's like let that let let me find the serenity. I'm going to get it wrong, but let me find the serenity to let go of what I cannot control.
Hmm.
Let me find the courage
Hmm.
to act in ways I can control, right?
Hmm.
And that's not the serenity prayer, but it's similar, right? And then help me find the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah, yeah.
And honestly, that's the work.
That is,
It's ancient and it's still alive today, and that is still the work for us to do.
yeah.
So that's your simple answer. Probably took a little longer than you hoped, but there it is.
No, it couldn't be better. It's like so many elements we've talked about today. You've just taken us from a very well-known aphorism or quote that has been in thousands of meetings around the world for a long time. And and when I slow down my system right now, when I slow down my breathing and slow down the rate at which I'm speaking, I'm allowing myself to feel a bit more. And there's something very, very moving about your reminding us of the serenity prayer and to know the difference between that which I can control, I can have some impact on, and that which I cannot. Because we are at a time at which that has hit an existential global level. That's not just about an intimate relationship where I'm, having arguments with a loved one or whatever it is that's so local, so intimate. We still have those. And now we get to take it all the way out to a global existential level. So I can't imagine a more appropriate way to kind of wrap up for us.
Would
Um,
you be okay if I read the serenity prayer? Because I kind of like
oh,
mangled it a little bit and I
bless your
found
heart. I appreciate
I would
it.
love
Yes.
that. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it gives me chills as I read those words. They're so much more succinct than what I said, but they have a profound truth and clarity. So thank you
Mhm.
for allowing me to share that too today.
Dr. Cindy Sholes, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to come and speak with us. And I'm looking very much forward already to our next time we get together Yeah, this has been as rich and moving as I could have imagined. And I'm so thankful that you have had the life experience that you have had to be able to bring that to us, share it so warmly with us. And I look forward to walking this path with the parallel path with you for some time to come. Thank you
Me
so much
too.
for coming on and speaking with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Hmm.
It's been a pleasure.
In